If you told me 6 months ago I'd be here, pouring my heart out to strangers online, I would have smirked and said, not a chance. But here I am, because sometimes life doesn't just pull the rug out from under you, it sets the whole damn house on fire. I'm Mike, 38, from Boise, Idaho. Lindsay and I were married for 9 years. On the surface, we were the golden couple, she in marketing, me in software development, a nice home, dinner parties, vacations. But underneath, things had been rotting for a while. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. Last-minute work trips, boring company parties where spouses were better off staying home, late nights when she came home smiling a little too wide, reeking of cologne that wasn't mine. But love is a funny thing. It makes you blind, makes you bargain with yourself. The moment everything snapped came last weekend. Lindsay said her company had a retreat at a lodge an hour away. No spouses. Fine, I thought. I stayed home, watched the game, cracked open a beer. But then Tyler, a friend of mine, called, said he was at the same lodge for a family event. And he saw Lindsay in the hot tub with 2 of her coworkers, laughing, drinking, and, as Tyler put it, definitely not dressed for a meeting. That was the moment the bottom dropped out of my life. The moment Tyler hung up, my brain went white hot. I remember just sitting there on the couch, gripping my beer so tightly the bottle nearly cracked in my hand. My heart pounded like a war drum in my chest. It wasn't just the image of her in that hot tub. It was the sickening realization that this wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't a slip-up. For over a year, Lindsay had been feeding me lies. I started rewinding every conversation, every boring work event, every last-minute schedule change. The time she told me I was too serious, that I should trust her more, that the guys from work are just harmless. Well, harmless had just jumped into a hot tub with my wife. I didn't sleep that night. I paced the living room until the sun came up, the TV still murmuring in the background, my mind racing. I debated confronting her when she got home, debated calling her right then, but something in me said no. Not this time. I'd spent 9 years swallowing things, smoothing things over, playing the nice guy. Not now. I needed evidence. So I waited. When Lindsay rolled in Sunday afternoon, sunburned, slightly tipsy, and humming to herself like she was the queen of the world, I played it cool. She kissed me on the cheek, chirped about how relaxing the retreat was, how productive the team had been, and how she was going to lie down for a nap. I smiled, handed her a glass of water, and quietly picked up her phone when she went upstairs. What I saw confirmed everything. There were texts, hundreds of them, between Lindsay and 2 coworkers, Nate and Corey. Late-night jokes, plans to sneak away at company events, laughing at how clueless I was. They even had a group chat named Jacuzzi Crew. The messages didn't leave anything to the imagination, sneaking into each other's rooms, slipping away during breaks, plans for their next getaway. I felt like I was drowning in my own living room. My hands were shaking, my mouth went dry. But there was a strange clarity too, the kind that only comes when the floor's been ripped out from under you, and you realize you're free falling. When Lindsay came downstairs later, all smiles, I was sitting at the table with her phone in my hand. Her face shifted in a heartbeat, from confusion to panic to that thin, brittle mask of fake innocence she'd perfected over the years. Relax, I told her, my voice so calm it startled even me. We're going to have a talk. And that's where the real storm started. The moment Lindsay realized I had her phone, her entire body tensed like a cornered animal. She tried that sugary voice she always used when she wanted to defuse me, said I was misunderstanding things, that the texts were just office jokes, that I was blowing it all out of proportion. But I wasn't biting this time. I calmly asked her how long it had been going on. She froze. That hesitation, that flicker in her eyes, that was my answer. I told her I knew about the late-night texts, the trips, the hot tub. I told her I knew Tyler had seen her. And just like that, the mask slipped. Lindsay's voice sharpened. She said I was invading her privacy, that I had no right to go through her phone. She flipped it around on me, like somehow I was the villain for catching her. Then came the tears, the sudden collapse into sobbing, hands over her face, sliding onto the floor like she was the victim in all of this. For a moment, I almost wavered. Almost. But then I remembered every night I stayed late at work so she could have her space, every birthday I celebrated alone because she was working, every little moment I convinced myself love was about patience and sacrifice. That's when the cold clarity came back. I stood over her and told her we were done. No shouting, no dramatic speech. Just a simple, solid sentence. This marriage is over. She begged. God, she begged. Promised she'd go to therapy, promised she'd cut them off, promised she'd make it up to me. But I'd crossed some internal line I didn't even know existed until that moment. There was no going back. I called a lawyer the next morning. Not just for the divorce, but to sue her employer, Because as it turned out, one of those guys she'd been with was her direct supervisor. Turns out company policy takes a pretty dim view of that kind of thing. Within weeks, Lindsay's world unraveled. She lost her job. The coworkers distanced themselves. Mutual friends stopped calling. And me? I walked away with my dignity intact. In the weeks after it all came crashing down, I expected to feel relief. I thought that once Lindsay was gone, once the papers were signed and her boxes were loaded into that Uber, I'd feel lighter. Free. But the truth is, freedom has a strange weight of its own. The house felt massive without her. Every room echoed with a kind of silence I wasn't prepared for. I'd sit at the kitchen table in the mornings, staring at the second coffee cup out of habit, only to realize I didn't need to make two anymore. Her side of the closet hung half empty, and even the fights, as toxic as they were, had filled a space I didn't know I'd miss. What hurt the most wasn't losing her. It was realizing how long I'd been lost myself. I thought back to who I was before this marriage, someone with friends, hobbies, weekends that weren't just about keeping the peace or keeping her happy. I used to hike, play guitar, meet up with buddies for poker nights. Somewhere along the way, I trimmed myself down to fit into the version of life Lindsay wanted. I hadn't even noticed the pieces I'd left behind. One of the first things I did was call up old friends. Tyler, obviously, who'd been the first to open my eyes. My buddy Jake, who hadn't heard from me in months. We grabbed beers, sat on the patio at a little place in downtown Boise, and for the first time in years, I laughed without feeling like I had to explain myself. I also picked up the guitar again. My fingers were clumsy at first, the strings biting into calluses I hadn't worn in years. But muscle memory is a funny thing, give it time, and it starts to come back. Same goes for dignity. The lawsuit against Lindsay's company moved faster than I expected. Turns out they were eager to make it go away quietly. The settlement wasn't life-changing, but it covered the legal fees, the divorce costs, and left me with enough to breathe easy. As for Lindsay, I heard bits and pieces. She tried to land another job, but the story followed her. A couple mutual friends reached out, cautiously testing the waters to see where I stood. I was polite, but firm. That chapter was closed. The strange thing was, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't want revenge. What I wanted was peace, and for the first time in years, I was starting to remember what that felt like. Acceptance crept in slowly, not as some big breakthrough moment, but in quiet ways. It was in the mornings when I woke up and didn't instinctively reach for my phone to check if Lindsay had texted. It was in the evenings when I sat on the back porch, guitar in hand, playing old songs without worrying whether she'd roll her eyes and tell me to keep it down. At first, there was anger. Of course there was. I punched the garage wall once, left a dent I still haven't patched up. I spent a few nights pacing, replaying every fight, every dismissive glance, every time she laughed a little too hard at someone else's joke in front of me. But anger is a strange visitor. It shouts on arrival, but if you don't feed it, it gets bored and leaves. What settled in after the anger was a kind of sobering sadness. I wasn't just grieving the marriage. I was grieving the version of myself I'd sacrificed to keep it alive. That hit the hardest. Realizing I'd bent, folded, reshaped myself to avoid rocking the boat, and it still sank anyway. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos. Not of Lindsay, but of me, photos Tyler had taken years ago on hiking trips, poker nights, road trips. There was this one shot of me, beer in hand, grinning like an idiot around a campfire. I stared at it for a long time. That guy felt like a stranger, but I wanted to meet him again. So I did something unexpected. I booked a solo hiking trip. Just a weekend in the Sawtooth Mountains, a trail I'd always meant to try but had shelled under someday. That weekend changed everything. It wasn't dramatic, no lightning bolts of clarity, no big emotional releases. Just me, a backpack, the cold mountain air, and the sound of my own footsteps crunching over dirt and gravel. For the first time in years, I was quiet inside. I came back sunburned, sore, and maybe a little lighter. And when I unlocked the front door to the house that used to feel too big and too empty, something shifted. It wasn't a prison anymore. It was just space. Space I could fill however I wanted. Life after betrayal isn't a straight road. It's a winding mess of detours, dead ends, and unexpected turns. I learned that the hard way. About a month after the hiking trip, something surprising started happening. People came back into my life. Old friends I hadn't seen in years reached out, some because they'd heard about the divorce, some because they just missed me. Tyler dragged me to a trivia night at a local bar, and before I knew it, I was laughing with strangers over beers and half-forgotten movie facts. For a while, I kept waiting for Lindsay to pop up. A text, a call, a dramatic appearance at the front door. But she didn't. The silence was almost unnerving at first, and then it became the greatest gift I never asked for. With the legal mess wrapped up and the papers finalized, I started focusing on things I'd left behind. I picked up weekend gigs playing guitar at small local venues, nothing fancy, just open mics and coffee shops. I started volunteering at an outdoor program for kids, helping teach them hiking and survival basics. Something about watching a group of nervous 10-year-olds learn to light a campfire felt like redemption in its own small way. One night, as I was packing up my guitar after a gig, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Claire, said she'd been watching me play for weeks but hadn't worked up the nerve to say hello. We talked, just talked, for over an hour, standing in the parking lot under the cold Boise stars. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift. Not love. Not yet. But possibility. I went home that night, sat on the edge of the bed, and realized I wasn't just rebuilding. I was becoming someone I liked again. Someone whole, not someone trying to hold together a life that had already fallen apart. And you know what? That felt like winning. Moving on wasn't a straight line, more like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But the steps were mine. That's what made the difference. There were still days when it hit me out of nowhere. Like the time I stopped by the grocery store and saw Lindsay's favorite granola on the shelf. I reached for it without thinking, paused, and then slowly put it back. That tiny moment, standing there in aisle 7, hand hovering over a box I no longer needed, said more about healing than any therapy session ever could. Some nights were still lonely. Quiet can be beautiful, but it can also feel like a weight pressing down on your chest. I'd sit on the couch, guitar untouched, wondering what Claire was doing or if I'd ever really trust anyone again. Not because I was bitter, I wasn't, but because something inside me had changed. Permanently. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart. It reshapes it. Like scar tissue, stronger, but never quite the same. Claire and I stayed in touch. Nothing serious, just texts here and there, the occasional coffee. She was patient, never pushed. She seemed to understand I wasn't ready for anything more, and I respected her for that. What I didn't expect was the message I got one Wednesday morning in early fall. It was from an unknown number. "Mike, it's Lindsay. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know how to respond. I knew exactly what I was going to say. But because part of me needed to sit with the moment. To acknowledge what it meant. She'd lost everything. And now she wanted. What? Closure? Forgiveness? A second chance? I typed 2 words. No need. I blocked the number. There was nothing left to say. I had already said it, and every step I'd taken since she walked out of that hot tub and out of my life. It surprised me how hard it was to forgive myself. Not Lindsay. I had no intention of giving her forgiveness, at least not the kind she'd ever hear. But me? That was trickier. I kept circling back to the same question. How did I not see it coming? How did I miss the late nights, the empty glances, the small betrayals piling up like pebbles behind a dam? How had I stayed when every instinct told me to walk away? For weeks, even as my life rebuilt itself piece by piece, that voice in my head kept whispering, "You should have known. You should have left sooner." But one night, sitting on the back porch under the cold Boise sky, I realized something that cracked the dam wide open. I stayed because I loved her. Not because I was weak. Not because I was blind. But because when you love someone, you want to believe they'll fight for you the way you fight for them. You want to believe the promises, the apologies, that "I'll do better next times." I wasn't an idiot. I was human. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it softened the edges. It let me put down the bat I'd been beating myself with. In the weeks that followed, I felt a shift. The house became home. The quiet became peace. The mirror, once something I'd avoided, became easier to face. One morning, I looked at myself, really looked, the fine lines around my eyes, the sunburn from that mountain trip, the small scar on my hand from some careless moment in the garage. And instead of seeing failure, I saw survival. That was the moment I forgave myself. It didn't come with fireworks. No applause, no movie ending. Just a deep, steady breath and the quiet thought. I'm okay. I'm still here. I made it. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing you can say. Funny thing about life, just when you think the big story is over, it sneaks up and hands you a new chapter. About 2 months after that night on the porch, the night I forgave myself, I got a call that would have shocked the old version of me. It was from a local nonprofit that ran wilderness programs for at-risk youth. Turns out someone at the kids' hiking program I volunteered with had recommended me. They wanted to know if I'd help lead a longer expedition, a week-long backpacking trip through the Sawtooth Mountains. A real challenge, they said. High altitude, rough terrain, kids who had never slept under the stars. The old me would have hesitated, come up with a polite excuse. But the me who'd crawled out of heartbreak and survived? He said yes before his brain caught up. Training for the trip gave me focus. I hiked every weekend, added weight to my pack, learned first aid basics. And something happened on those solo treks into the hills. I felt strong again. Not just physically, though. Yeah, my legs were in better shape than they'd been in years, but inside, resilient. When the week of the trip came, I was nervous. Could I handle the responsibility? Would I freeze up if a kid got scared, or hurt, or homesick? Turns out, I didn't freeze. The first night around the campfire, one of the boys, maybe 15, tough exterior but eyes full of worry, asked quietly if I'd ever been through something hard. I didn't give him details, but I said, yeah, I knew what it was like to lose something and have to rebuild. And for the first time, I saw what all this wreckage had been for. It wasn't about revenge, or proving something, or even healing just for myself. It was about using the pain, the lessons, to be useful in the world. When I came home, tired and sore, the house didn't feel empty. It felt earned. After the expedition, I thought I'd come home and collapse into old routines, maybe retreat back into my own little world. But something had shifted. Claire and I kept crossing paths, as if the universe had quietly decided we weren't done. At first, it was just coffee after one of my open mic nights. Then she invited me to help with a charity event she was organizing, a local food drive downtown. Before I knew it, we were spending weekends together, hiking, cooking, laughing over terrible old movies. But here's the part one didn't expect. Even as something new blossomed, the past still echoed. There were moments, tiny, sharp ones, when doubt crept in. Claire would glance at her phone during dinner, and for half a second, my stomach would tighten. She'd mention a coworker, and a small, cold knot would form in my chest. I hated that. Not because I thought she'd ever do what Lindsay did. Claire had shown me nothing but honesty, but because I realized how deeply betrayal rewires your brain. Trust becomes a muscle you have to rebuild, one shaky repetition at a time. One night, I told Claire. I admitted that sometimes I flinch inside when I shouldn't. I expected her to pull back, maybe get defensive. Instead, she just squeezed my hand and said, softly, "Thank you for telling me." That moment cracked something open in me. It wasn't about pretending the past never happened. It was about learning to carry it differently, not as armor, not as baggage, but as part of the map that brought me here. I still have the dent in the garage wall from the night I punched it. I never patched it. I thought about it a few times, even bought the spackle, but each time, I left it alone. It's not a scar I need to erase. It's a reminder of where I was and how far I've come. Closure isn't something you chase down. It's something that sneaks up on you when you're too busy living to notice. One evening in early winter, I was walking downtown after grabbing coffee with Claire. Snow was falling in that quiet, soft way that makes the world feel gentler. As I passed the bookstore window, I caught my reflection, bundled in a jacket, guitar case slung over my shoulder, face lined but calm. I barely recognized myself. And that was a good thing. What surprised me even more was what came next. A few days later, I ran into someone I hadn't expected to see, one of Lindsay's old coworkers. She looked awkward, almost guilty, like she was waiting for me to bite her head off. But instead, I just nodded and smiled politely. She hesitated, then blurted out that Lindsay had left town, moved back in with her parents, that things hadn't worked out with Nate or Corey or any of the crowd she'd clung to. And in that moment, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just a kind of quiet, weightless peace. The version of me from a year ago would have obsessed over that news. He would have replayed it in his mind, searching for meaning, for vindication. But the version standing there on a cold sidewalk in Boise, he just wanted to get home, make dinner, maybe text Claire about meeting up later. That's the strange beauty of survival. It teaches you what matters and what you can finally let go. Back home that night, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea warming my hands. The dent in the garage wall caught my eye again, but this time, it made me smile. Not because I was proud of that moment of anger, but because it marked a line in the sand. The night I stopped breaking myself for someone who didn't care. And under that quiet Idaho sky, I realized something simple but profound. I hadn't just survived. I had rebuilt.